Hi students, welcome to Year 11 Biology and Module 3, Biological Diversity. This is video number 12 and we're going to have a very quick cook's tour on the evolution of the platypus. Our learning intention for this video is to be able to analyse how an accumulation of microevolutionary change can drive evolutionary change and speciation over time, for example, the evolution of the platypus. So I think there's again 3 levels of understanding that you want to try and aim for as you're working through not just this video but also the material that you've been working through in class and probably as you're starting to prepare for your exams now. You need to be able to discuss something about the history of the platypus. You should be able to describe some of the evolutionary relationships which apply to the platypus, and ideally at the highest level, or at least at the level of deepest understanding, you may be able to identify important features of the platypus which may have driven evolutionary change in the lineage, and also be able to link these, I guess, back to some of what we know from the fossil record. So the platypus is a very interesting Australian and one that's had quite a significant history, certainly in terms of the fact that when it was first discovered, or at least first described, and the first specimens were sent back, there was a belief that this was not actually a real animal. It has such an unusual combination of features that it really it does look like a couple of different types of animals sort of stuck together. And I guess the most obvious ones that we can look at are the certainly the bill, the web feet, the fact that it has hair and it does produce milk, but it also lays eggs. So it's a combination of some quite very interesting different types of features. You can see in this little diagram that there are not only a number of very important features of the platypus that certainly do put it into the mammal class, but not perfectly sitting in that class. And also to the side a little cladogram, a little phylogenetic tree, which I'll come back to later in this video. So let's see if we can pull this apart a little bit. The platypus has been known from pre-Mesozoic, actually. Pre-Mesozoic times is when we kind of try and track back to the earliest mammals, early mammals. So we know that there were sort of proto-mammals existing through this time and through the age of dinosaurs, which is the Mesozoic, is sort of famous for being the time of the dinosaurs. But mammals were there too. They were very small and they're pretty much very quiet. They certainly don't appear in huge numbers, nor in great diversity. But the extinction of the dinosaurs, or at least their evolution into birds, seems to have created some very important niche openings that allowed the early mammals to radiate and to create the great diversity that we see. This time period in terms of the Earth's continents was also a time of Gondwana and supercontinents, and that was the great supercontinent in the south, and that included things like Africa, South America, Antarctica, as well as Australia and India. And so the distribution of fossils that we see of these ancient mammals has this classic Gondwanan distribution. So when we start to look at what were some of those key features that started to tell us that this was these fossils that we may see from older rocks have become mammal-like, is this combination of interesting features. So the bill and the webbed feet, which are classically bird features, poison glands and egg laying, which are almost more reptilian features, although birds do lay eggs obviously as well, and of course the hair or fur and the production of milk, which are definitely mammalian characteristics. So this organism was quite an unusual one. It looks like the radiation that occurred from mammals occurred separately from the radiation that led to development of birds. So it's really interesting. It's not like there's a linear relationship between reptiles, birds, and mammals. So some of these developmental features like the bill and like the webbed feet that suggest a bird-like common ancestry certainly don't seem to feature that way when we look into the phylogeny, when we look a little bit closer at the evolutionary relationships between these different organisms and when they branched. So let's do that now. The first known Australian mammals were these platypuses, and they are known from the early Cretaceous. We do have some very beautiful fossilized jaws of early platypus, and you can see that the jaw has teeth, and the bill now has kind of like little pads, soft little pads, but they don't have proper teeth. They certainly don't. They don't have the classic beak of a bird, but they don't have the jaw of a reptile nor of a mammal either. So they're a very interesting group that we see today. But these opalized jaws, these ones that were very much older that we know from the fossil record, do have teeth in the jaws. So they're an interesting comparison point between the fossils that we know of that are platypus-like from the fossil record and the current species that we have today. And remember, when we're looking at evolutionary pathways, when we're trying to get a sense of what's happened in these from the common ancestor through the adaptive radiation, we're trying to figure out what happened to the platypus, what sort of niche did it fill, what sort of selection pressures were acting on it that made these changes from a very early proto kind of mammal to this monotrim group that seems to be quite significantly different from the other mammals. So let's maybe have a little bit of a look at the family tree, or at least the phylogeny of the mammals particularly, and see where it is that the platypus fits in. Well, here's kind of a little bit of an idea of the evolutionary lineage that has taken us from the group of early ancestors, the common ancestors for mammals, birds, and reptiles, and through to the groups that we see today. So the group that we're looking at, particularly that we're trying to track through, are these therapsids, these very early proto-mammals that were in existence pre-Mesozoic through the Permian, and then in through the age of the dinosaurs when the reptiles had their great radiation. And in fact, we believe that some of those types of dinosaurs actually gave rise to adaptive radiation in the birds, but not the same group did not give rise to the mammals. So there's a separation point very clear between birds and mammals. And that's very important because when we look at bird-like characteristics, we now have to talk about convergence, not divergence from a common ancestor. So that means that we're talking about selective pressures which demonstrate some similarities. And when we're talking about jaws and teeth, we're generally talking about food sources, and we're talking about the types of food that was available for these early mammals. So we see that there is a point where we get a radiation of these early therapsids into Prototherian, or the monotremes, the ones that we call the monotremes, which are basically just the platypus and the echidna. And then the Metatherian group, which are the marsupial group, and the Eutherian group, which are sometimes called placentals. Bit of a misnomer, that one, because there are marsupials that have a placenta. So it probably, if you can get into this headspace where you think Eutheria, Metatheria for the marsupials, Prototheria first mammal groups for the monotremes, that gives you a little bit of an idea of how these groups have changed. And you can see that there's a common ancestor through that sort of early Cretaceous that's led to the radiation in both the marsupials and the Eutheria group. But the common ancestor of those and the monotremes, or the Prototheria, was much earlier, back in the Jurassic. So this is what we're trying to look for. This is the evidence we have. So what we've got to try to do is look at how the evidence we have links to our theory. Now in class we'll have a look at a few more additional pieces of evidence and some things that we can look at to try and piece together this story a little bit more. Very difficult in a short video, which I don't suppose this qualifies as a short video anymore. But just to try and capture some of these key evolutionary relationships that led to the radiation of these very early mammals into this huge range of mammal species that we see today, and especially into that very unusual organism, the platypus. So we will get an opportunity in class to have a little bit more of a look at the platypus, such an unusual animal and one definitely worth studying. Thanks for watching.